What if I told you that the Bible contains some of the most sophisticated trauma recovery models ever written? Before modern psychology existed, these ancient texts were already documenting complex trauma patterns and healing processes that therapists are just now beginning to understand. Today, we're diving deep into 4 biblical figures whose stories reveal profound insights about overcoming life's most devastating experiences. Let me start with something that might shock you. Joseph's story isn't just about dreams and colorful coats. It's actually one of the most complete trauma recovery narratives ever recorded. This man experienced what psychologists now call complex developmental trauma, starting from his earliest years. Picture this. Joseph grows up in a household where his father openly favors him over his 11 brothers. That's not just family dysfunction, that's a setup for serious psychological damage. The preferential treatment creates a toxic environment where love becomes conditional and siblings become enemies. But the trauma doesn't stop there. At 17 years old, Joseph experiences one of the most devastating betrayals imaginable. His own brothers, the people who should protect him, decide to murder him. They literally throw him into a pit to die. Then, almost as an afterthought, they sell him into slavery instead. Imagine the psychological impact of that moment when Joseph realizes his brothers value 20 pieces of silver more than his life. But here's where Joseph's story becomes extraordinary. After being sold into slavery, he faces false accusations of sexual assault from his master's wife. When he refuses her advances and maintains his integrity, she destroys his reputation and has him thrown into prison. For years, Joseph sits in a dungeon for a crime he didn't commit, watching his youth slip away while experiencing chronic injustice. Most people would emerge from this sequence of traumas completely broken. But Joseph demonstrates something that modern trauma therapists call post-traumatic growth. When he finally gains power in Egypt, he has the opportunity for revenge against his brothers. Instead, he models 3 crucial trauma recovery skills that therapists teach today. First, he practices cognitive reframing. Instead of seeing his suffering as meaningless, he tells his brothers that what they meant for evil, God meant for good. He doesn't minimize his pain, but he finds purpose in it. Second, he demonstrates radical forgiveness, not as denial of harm, but as a conscious choice to break the cycle of revenge. Third, he creates meaning from his suffering by using his position to save thousands of lives during a devastating famine. Now let's shift to Hannah, whose story reveals a different type of trauma recovery. Hannah faces what we now recognize as emotional abuse and reproductive trauma. For years, she endures the cruel taunts of Peninnah, her husband's other wife, who mocks her inability to have children. This isn't just teasing, it's systematic psychological torture designed to destroy her sense of worth. The text tells us that Peninnah would provoke Hannah severely, making her weep and refuse to eat. This is classic emotional abuse, resulting in symptoms we'd recognize today as anxiety and depression. But what makes Hannah's story remarkable is how she finds healing. Instead of suppressing her emotions or pretending everything is fine, Hannah engages in what therapists call emotional expression therapy. She goes to the temple and pours out her heart so intensely that the priest initially mistakes her for being drunk. She's not holding back. She's not being polite about her pain. She's engaging in raw, honest lament. But here's the crucial part. She finds support. The priest Eli, after initially misunderstanding her, becomes an advocate. He blesses her and assures her that God has heard her prayer. Hannah discovers what every trauma survivor needs: a safe relationship where they can be honest about their pain without judgment. The result is transformative. Hannah not only conceives and bears Samuel, but she becomes a powerful voice of hope. Her prayer in chapter 2 of 1 Samuel is considered one of the most beautiful expressions of faith and resilience in Scripture. She moved from victim to survivor to thriver. David's story presents us with perhaps the most complex trauma narrative in Scripture. This man faces repeated assassination attempts, lives as a fugitive for years, experiences constant warfare, and watches his family fall apart through violence and betrayal. His son tries to kill him and steal his throne. Another son rapes his sister. His own wives are taken by his enemies. What makes David's story so psychologically fascinating is that we have his internal processing documented in the Psalms. These aren't sanitized religious poems, they're raw emotional processing sessions. David moves through rage, despair, confusion, and hope sometimes within the same psalm. He doesn't suppress his emotions, he expresses them fully. In Psalm 22, David cries out about feeling forsaken by God. In Psalm 51, he grapples with his own moral failures. In Psalm 127, he processes family dysfunction. David models what therapists now call emotional regulation through expression rather than suppression. He feels deeply, processes honestly, and finds his way back to stability. But perhaps the most clinically accurate trauma narrative in Scripture belongs to Elijah. 1 Kings chapter 19 gives us what reads like a textbook case of psychological burnout and suicidal ideation. After his victory over the prophets of Baal, Elijah crashes hard. He experiences what we now recognize as the common pattern after intense stress: isolation, exhaustion, and catastrophic thinking. Elijah runs into the wilderness, sits under a tree, and literally asks to die. He tells God he's had enough and wants his life to end. This is clinical depression following extreme stress, documented 3,000 years before we had terms for it. But what happens next is extraordinary. God doesn't lecture Elijah about his lack of faith or tell him to pull himself together. Instead, God responds with what looks remarkably like modern therapeutic intervention. First, rest. An angel touches Elijah and tells him to sleep. Then nutrition. The angel provides food and water, addressing his basic physiological needs. Then gentle presence. God doesn't appear in the earthquake or fire, but in a still small voice, providing calm, supportive presence. Finally, God gives Elijah a new assignment, but not before addressing his isolation. God tells him there are 7,000 others who haven't bowed to Baal. Elijah isn't alone. This is community therapy, helping him reconnect with purpose and people. What's remarkable about these narratives is how they anticipate modern trauma therapy principles. They show us that healing happens through honest expression, supportive relationships, meaning-making, and gradual re-engagement with life and community. These stories remind us that trauma isn't the end of the story. With the right support, processing, and time, post-traumatic growth is possible. Joseph became a leader who saved nations. Hannah became a prophet who shaped history. David became a king whose legacy endures. Elijah continued his prophetic ministry with renewed strength. Your trauma doesn't define you, but how you process it can transform you. These ancient narratives offer hope that even the deepest wounds can become sources of wisdom, compassion, and strength.